Hello, everybody. Myself, Dr. Niranjan, and I'm working as assistant professor in the Department of Economics, Vijayanagar, Krishnadevaraya University. Uh, Today, I'm going to present my views on this coronavirus, COVID-19, and the challenges we are facing today. So, my presentation is titled as COVID-19 and the twin crisis. Twin crisis in the sense we have both health crisis and the economic crisis, the challenges the economy is facing right now. So I will be focusing on the economic challenges. So before we start with the challenges economic challenges we are facing with because of this COVID-19, let us we see some of the statistics as on date. So as on date, that is on 12th May, we have confirmed cases in India for about 74,329 confirmed cases, and in one day, so the cases has jumped by 3,561, and the active cases are 47,462 are the active cases, and it jumped by 1,537. And the recovered cases are, as on date, 24,453 people are successfully recovered, and uh, today 1,904 people have been recovered. And lastly, if we look into the death, so there are 120 people are died of this virus on 12th May 2020. And uh, as on date, total number of people tested are 17,59,579 people have been tested, and probably it may as the more people have been tested, the number of infection people may also rise. So this crisis is altogether a different one, which we have not experienced before. This is a different challenge altogether, because first we have to save lives, then we have to save the livelihoods. The saving life is an health aspect, and saving livelihoods, there is an economic aspect. So then we, in a larger perspective, then we have to meet other costs such as job losses, production, loss in production, supply chain distributions. So this impact is not confined to one sector or the one country. It encompasses the entire economy and the entire world altogether. Hence, probably we don't know, and there is no immediate fix, and we don't know for how long this problem will continue, or how long it is going to persist. The impact of the COVID-19 might be more acute and long lasting, owing to the state of the economy we were in the pre-COVID period. So in the pre-COVID period, suppose if we look into the quarterly GDP growth rate in India from 2015-16 to 2019-20, quarter one and quarter two. So if you look that graph, the GDP growth rate, which was very high in 15-16, quarter four, 7.9%, and it declined to 4.5% in 1920. In this fiscal year, 1920, the GDP growth rate has been very much declined, and it started to decline from, say that, 17-18. Fourth quarter was the highest growth rate with 7.9%, and from 18-19 first quarter 7.7, it declined to 7.7%, and thereafter it's continuously sliding. And as per the latest forecast in the quarter three of the fiscal year 1920, uh, there is which is the lowest in over 6 years. In the third quarter 1920, the GDP growth rate, and the outbreak of the COVID-19, as with this growth rate of the Indian economy, the outbreak of the COVID-19 has posed fresh challenges for the economy. And we know that by the time the first COVID-19 case was reported in India in the month of mid January or Feb, the economy has already been deteriorated significantly. So unemployment reached a 45-year high, industrial output from the majorly 8 core industrial sectors at the end of 2019 fell by 5.2%, and this is the worst in last 14 years. So this was the at the macroeconomic scenario, um, the state of the Indian economy in the pre-COVID period. Suppose if we look into the, even if we dwell into the other macroeconomic variables, high frequency indicators such as um, urban consumption demand, it presents another a bleak picture, subdued picture for quarter three and quarter four of 1920. So. Uh, since we are focusing on the state of the economy at the advent of this COVID-19, we look into the quarter three and majorly quarter two and quarter three period of fiscal year 1920. The sale of the in the high frequency indicators, focusing on urban demand, we have three indicators. The one is passenger vehicle sales, consumer durables, consumption of consumer durables, domestic air passenger tariff. Okay, so in all this, the sale of passenger vehicles continue to contract, passenger, that is in the green color. So it went to the negative. Passenger vehicle sales, that is the consumption of passenger vehicle sales, continue to contract, and it started from October until February 2020. On the other hand, the consumer durables, which was shown in the blue color, which is hovering in the now minus 4% or 4% category, consumer durables growth contracted in January 2020, even though there has been some surge in vehicle loan growth for households, which is shown in the other side of the figure, that is credit vehicle loans, household credit. This is uh, what we the other side of the graph is household credit given by the different credit given to household sector. So vehicle loans, credit card outstanding, and other personal loans. We can see that the personal loans is declining. It's a decline started from December. December, sorry, it started from October 19 and until February, it's in it's a declining, and credit card outstanding has increased, and uh, other personal loans, it's 20.6%, and vehicle loans has surged to 10.3%. Uh, surge in vehicle loan growth for households and growth in credit card outstanding in February 2020. Overall, we can say that urban consumption appears to be have lost stream in quarter four, with the outbreak of COVID-19 having affected the moderation. Focusing on the rural consumption, uh, So in the rural consumption, this we have again three indicators: tractor sales, consumer non-durables, motorcycles, consumption of motorcycles, and this data is from the monetary policy report of April 2020 RBI. So if you look into, and the other graph says indicators of investment demand. So import of capital goods, housing loans by scheduled commercial banks, given by scheduled commercial banks, and index of industrial production capital goods. Suppose if you look into the movement of rural demand for the last quarter, um, that is the third quarter, second and the third quarter for the fiscal year 1920, the demand for consumption of non-durables remained weak. The motorcycle sales remained in contraction in February 2020. However, the tractors sales improved in January. That is reflected because of improved rabi sowing, and that tractor consumption is altogether goes into a different income bracket. And we can say that weak rural demand due to depressed food prices and a decline in rural wages. On the other hand, we can see that investment. reflects the current economic climate. The level of investment reflects the current economic climate. The two high frequency indicators of investment demand are production, index of industrial production, and the import of capital goods by the industries in the economy. In this context, we can see that the import of capital goods, that's the blue color line, has gone negative. So it's a decline started from August 19, and it's continuing till October. It was the import of capital goods declined very much, and it moderated from November 19. But however, by the end of January or the February, the capital industry demand for capital goods is minus 1.8%. And if we look into the housing loans given by scheduled commercial banks, it's almost remaining the same, 17 constant. Currently, it's performing or growing 17.1%. Whereas the green line, which indicates the index of industrial production, a movement of capital goods, it's uh, it's in the minus 4.3, which is negative 4 point in the negative zone. We can say that in this the investment demand, but especially it shows the performance of the industry during the fiscal year, during the quarter two and quarter three of the fiscal year 1920, which is very bleak. And this was the state of the Indian economy during the advent of COVID-19. That means our industry is not performing, our rural demand is weak, our urban consumption is declining, and the GDP is the all-time lowest with 4.5% in almost 14 years. This was the overview of the state of the economy. So in this context, the lockdown will definitely dampen any chance of a revival of consumption demand and the private investment, and it will take long time to revive the domestic demand as well as to revive the private investment. So the other key important macroeconomic variables which I'm going to present here, uh, the performance of other important macroeconomic variables are savings and investment gap. We know that we know that theoretically we know that savings stimulates investment, and especially the domestic savings play a major role in stimulating investment. And you can notice, and this data is again is from Monetary Policy Report April 2020. There is orange is the orange line is the saving rate, and blue line is the investment rate. So after 1617, the saving and investment mismatch is increasing, augmenting, and the public sector is dissaving. Is a dissaving is to the tune of minus 5.7% of the GDP, and the private sector is again it also falls in the dissaving bracket, minus 1.5% of the GDP, and the household sector saving is 6.7% of the GDP. So if we look into the savings and investment gap, the gross domestic saving rate has decreased to 30.1% of GDP in 2018-19 from 32.4% in 17-18. The saving rate of the household sector, which is a net supplier to the net supplier of funds to the economy, declined from 23.6% of GDP in 11-12 to 18.2% in 18-19. The household savings has declined drastically from 23.6% of GDP in 11-12 to 18.2% in 18-19. On the other hand, the private and the public sector continues to rely heavily on households for financing its debt. We can see that the public sector is a net dissaver to the tune of 5.7%, and the private sector is a net dissaver to the tune of 1.5% of the GDP, minus 1.5% of the GDP. On the other hand, we can see that there is no the incentives for savings, where we can see that there is a big cut in savings in we can see that there is a big cut in savings uh, uh, from all different type of deposits as well as the funds. So saving deposits remain same from January March 1920 to April June 2020. The saving deposit rate is remains same 4%, whereas for 1 year time deposits the rate declined from 6.9% to 5.5%. Um, and for the 2 year time deposit and the 3 year time deposits, the tune of cut in cut in interest rate is the same, that is from 6.9% to 5.5%. On the other hand, 5 year time deposits, the rate of interest declined from 7.7% to 6.7%, 1%. 5 year recurring deposit, it has been reduced drastically. So the rate of interest declined from 7.2% in January March 1920 to 7.4% in April June 2020. Monthly income account, uh, the interest rate cut from 7.6% to 6.6%. And on the other hand, the national savings certificates, the interest rate has been cut, reduced from 7.9% to 6.8%. And PPF funds, Public Provident Fund Scheme, and that also 7.9% to 7.1% decline. Kishan Vikas Patra, that also it declined from 7.6% to 6.9%. And there is there is huge investment in Sukanya Samriddhi scheme. There we can notice that the interest rate has been declined from 8.4% to 7.6%. In most of the savings instruments of the households, the interest rate has been declined, and that will be noticeable in the future, in the fourth quarter of 2020, where we can see that there will be a decline in the public savings, in the household savings also. Uh, during Moving on, during this crisis time, during this crisis time, so one sector that plays a major role in terms of alleviating or solving the pressures on the real economy or the industrial economy is the financial sector, because it is it is it is the intermediation which plays a major role. The need of the hour is to keep credit flowing to all categories of economic agents such as firms, households, and the business, to help to tide over from this crisis. The banking sector in India is badly broken. So far, the problems in this sector were adversely affecting credit growth. We know that the sector is faced with many issues, such as recently the IL and FS, the infrastructure leasing and financial services defaulted its debt on September 2018, and we know that a DHFL crisis, and Punjab and Maharashtra cooperative bank crisis, and the recently Yes Bank crisis. So the banking sector itself is faced with high non-performing assets and over leverage and financially weak firms in the private corporate sector. So with these issues, one consequences on the banking sector is that a risk aversion in the banking system led to the slow growth of credit in the a slow growth in commercial credit supply. So this is reflected in this one chart 19, the growth of financial services. Again, this is drawn from Monetary Policy Report, April 2020, where we can see that the banking credit has started declining from March 2019, which was the highest around some 14% or 13%, 13%. It declined to 6.1% in the March, that is almost in third quarter of fiscal year 2020, to the tune of 6.1%. The bank credit is declining continuously. On the other hand, aggregate deposits owing, and it is 9.1%, and it was declined from December, and thereafter it's moderated, and it's hovering around 9.1%. We can see that this The low credit by the banking sector may be because of several banking crises, which have been banking issues and the problems which the banking sector has been facing, which have been noted previously, such as IL and FS crisis, DHFL, PMC, Yes Bank, non-performing assets, and so we can see that the other graph which shows the non-performing assets. Why we are focusing on the banking sector is the government is come up with the monetary policy uh, where the role of the banking sector is to provide credit. So the banking sector is itself is facing with so many problems. So we are focusing on few indicators on the banking sector. Suppose if you look into the non-performing assets of the banking sector, the agriculture sector is year 10%. Having 10%, agriculture is having non-performing assets to the tune of 10%, and the industrial sector is with an highest of some 22%. It's declined to 16.1% of non-performing assets. Services sector is the 7.4%. The retail loans is 1.8%. So this was the state of the banking sector during the advent of the COVID-19. And if you look into the sectoral deployment of credit, so how the credit has been deployed to different sectors. Uh, so the credit deployment to the uh, agricultural sector is uh, it's around 5.8%, and it's a declined very marginally. On the other hand, the industrial sector, the credit to the industrial sector has substantially declined from 6% to 0.7%, and you can notice the quantum of decline in the year-on-year decline in the credit to the services sector, the highest of around 27%, it declined to 6.9%. And the personal loans, that again, the personal loan depends on uh, the the repayment capability. Retail loans, it's hovering around 16%. On an average, it is hovering around 16%. Um, so this was the situation, the banking sector, especially the public sector banks, which account for close to 90% of non-performing assets. They have severely restricted their lending to the private corporate sector, especially the industrial sector. Hence, credit to industry had declined dramatically, whereas offtake loans to the personal loan segment accounted for a largest share. This credit growth declined sharply despite the RBI lowering the policy rate by 135 basis points by points to 5.15% in 2019. This was the lowest rate in nearly 8 decades. So, in spite of this low rate, the deployment of credit is low. Uh, in light of this, we can see what RBI governor has pointed out, due to the low credit given by the banking sector, is that in view of subdued profitability and deleveraging by certain corporates, risk averse banks have shifted their focus away from large infrastructure and industrial loans towards retail loans. So, RBI governor itself is acknowledging the fact that decline in uh, lending to industrial sector is due to contain risk as well as to maintain profitability. They are focusing on the retail loans. So if you look into the other graph which I have shown here, is this sectoral share in credit flow. So if you look into this graph, uh, personal loans in the month of February 19 and in the month of February 20, year on year. The personal loan share was 31.9%, but it has increased to 60.6%, where we can we can correlate this to the statement given by the RBI governor. And the service sector credit share is 45% in February 19, and it declined to 25.9%. And industry, which was 15.2%, and it's declined to the single digit to 3.1%. and the agriculture sector 7.9 to 10.4%. So the banks are don't want to take risks by lending to the industrial sector, which is facing its industrial sector having its own problems. So uh, this was the state of the banking sector. Uh, while we can say the part of the fall in commercial credit growth may have been due to the lack of demand, given the balance sheet crisis in the private corporate sector. Some of the studies pointed that uh, a reluctance by the banks to extend credit has also been a big factor. If you observe the growth rate in the sectoral deployment across sectors, uh, personal loan have seen jumped marginally, and it was owing. Is that purple 17%. So although credit growth in the service sector showed an uptick in January 2020, it again weakened in February 2020. This was the state of the real and the financial economy during the advent of the COVID-19. The economy was experiencing a moderate growth for the year 2021. Because in any economy the performance it depends upon the industry and the finance, so we have to have a overview of the banking sector, financial sector, as well as the real sector in order to understand its the COVID impact on the economy. So if you look into the impact of this COVID-19 on the economic impact, so we know that all economic activities will come to an abrupt halt. So lockdown has brought nearly all economic activities to an abrupt halt. So there will be a disruption in demand and supply forces, and they are likely to continue even after the lockdown is lifted. It will take some more time to return to a normal stage. It definitely takes more time to return to a normal stage. So if you look into the demand forces, it is unlikely to see improvement in the next several months, especially the demand for non-essential goods and services. In broad, when we assess a demand, it consists of three major components of consumption, three major components such as consumption demand, investment demand, and external demand. External demand is nothing but exports, or all these demand aspects are likely to be affected for a prolonged period. In addition to fall in demand, there will be widespread supply chain disruptions as well due to the unavailability of raw materials, movement of millions of migrants workers to their hometowns from urban areas, and slowing global trade. And as we all observing in day-to-day news, there is the global trade is declining, and because of shipment and travel-related restrictions imposed by nearly all affected countries. We are all aware and reading news about industries struggling due to complete disruption of supply chains from China, because China was a manufacturer for the entire world and it was supplying raw materials to the entire world. Industries such as electronics, pharmaceuticals, chemical products, etc. All these are dependent on the supply chains from China. It will negatively affect production in majority of the domestic industries. This in turn will have further spillover effects on investment, employment, income, and consumption, pulling down the growth rate of the economy. The burden of this current lockdown is, in larger perspective, borne disproportionately by the large unorganized workforce, comprising hundreds of millions of casual workers, daily wage workers, self-employed workers, migrant workers, street vendors, contract workers, almost everyone in the informal sector. The bulk of the workforce is being hit by the crisis. Migrant workers, especially in the industrial states such as Maharashtra, Gujarat, Tamil Nadu, and Karnataka, are stranded without work, and they are moving to their hometowns with a lot of difficulty, and that too without wages and without adequate food and without adequate transport also. The symptoms of and this all will be a great pullback to the economy. The symptoms of the shock, uh, we can quantitatively the symptom of shock economic slowdown or a shock is a sharp depreciation of the Indian currency to the dollar. The value of the rupee fell from 71.13 rupees to the dollar on February 12 to rupees 76 to the dollar, and it was hovering around 77. So with this, we can look into the overall impact on the economy. This was the figure which I contained till this. Have not included March and April, but however, it was the symptom of economic shock is the sharp depreciation of the Indian rupee in relation to the dollar. The value of a rupee fell from 71.3 to the dollar uh, in February 12 to 76.31 rupees. And in relative to that, during this same period, we can notice that foreign portfolio investors have net sold 41,657 crores of Indian equities during this year. So uh, the Indian economy, okay, so the Indian economy is expected to lose, or so this was the different forecasting agency, and how they are, what was the extent of loss which they have predicted. So according to the acute ratings, which is these acute ratings is approved by RBI. It's an RBI approved credit rating agency. According to the acute ratings, the Indian economy is expected to lose over $4.5 billion, that is 32,000 crores per day during this 21-day lockdown period, and that is again an extended lockdown period in plus 21 plus an extended lockdown period. The another rating agency, Barclays, said that the shutdown, the lockdown, and the previous two shorter costed 8.5 lakh crore, that is $120 billion. World Bank says, the World Bank report says that the Indian economy is expected to grow from 1.5% to 2.8%. And according to State Bank of India's Econ Wrap, there is likely to be 1.7% impact on the real GDP in fiscal year 21. The total cost of the lockdown is estimated at least to be 8.63 lakh crore in nominal terms, which is translated to the roughly to the 4% of the GDP. Another rating agency, important rating agency, is the India Ratings and Research, also downgraded the fiscal year estimate to 3.6% of the GDP. On the other hand, the UN report, it says the trade loss is estimated to be around $348 million. The graph which shows the pre-COVID period forecast and the post-COVID forecast by the different agencies. IMF said that Indian economy will be grow by 5.8% in the pre-COVID period, and in the month of March and April, they downgraded the forecast to 1.9%. So World Bank, again, it said the Indian economy is going to be 5%, and in the post COVID period forecast, it said that India will grow by 1.5% to 4%. The RBI, it's too optimistic. It's forecast, it downgraded. It's just 0.5%. Moody also downgraded off of its pre-COVID crisis forecast, so from 5.4% to 2.5%. So Fitch also downgraded the Indian GDP growth forecast. Earlier it was 5.6%, and now it says that Indian economy will be grow by just less than 1% of 0.8%. So so this was the forecast by the different forecasting different international agencies. So now if we look into the impact of this COVID on selected industries. So before going to the industries, we look into the impact on the agriculture. So if we look into the union central government guidelines, we know that the Union Home Ministry, it has exempted farm work and farming operations and agencies engaged in procurement of agricultural products. That means the minimum support price. Mandis notified by the state governments. Intrastate movement of of harvesting and sowing related machines and manufacturing, packaging units of fertilizers, pesticides, and among others. So these are the activities which have been exempted by the uh, Home Ministry. So that means APMCs have been exempted from the lockdown. According to Union Ministry guidelines, packaging units of fertilizers, pesticides, seeds, all these have been exempted. But in spite of that, the lockdown and the associated disruptions will affect agricultural activities and the necessary supply chains through several channels. So the several channels in the sense there will be input distribution, harvesting, procurement, transport orders, marketing, and processing. So restriction of movement and labor scarcity because of because of migrant workers. It may have, especially the problem of migrant workers will be more severe in the North India compared to South India, and in South India, so is also in only in the some parts such as Kodagu, where there will be more labor migrants will be there, as well as in tea estates in Kerala and Tamil Nadu. So restrictions and movement and labor scarcity will affect farming and food processing industries. And because March, April is the peak season for the sale of Rabi products, but harvesting will get affected due to the departure of thousands of migrant workers. So, and in addition to that, we due to the lockdown, there will be closure of restaurants, transport bottlenecks, all this will diminish demand for fresh produce, food products, and mainly the poultry and the fishery products. All this will be affected by the will be affected mainly because they will be looking these restaurants and all this will be on the bulk consumers. So hence it will be have a larger impact on the agricultural sector. Suppose before going to the different industrial sector, a study by Narayan 2020 indicates that farmers are stuck with harvest as APMC is closed. Though APMC is exempted from the lockdown, the transporters are not turning out. Mandis are closed in several states, and this is disrupting food supply disruption from the production to the consumption centers. Despite being considered as an essential service, agriculture and food supply chains have been greatly impacted. Livelihoods are affected due to interlinkages to the sector, such as the transport sector, traders in APMC. So, in that sense, we can say that agriculture sector has been greatly impacted with this COVID-19 crisis. If you look into the impact on the industries, the manufacturing sector faces a triple challenge. It's a triple challenge in the sense, firstly, there will be supply distortions, and that supply distortion is not only with foreign suppliers but also with the domestic suppliers also. Sectors like automobiles, pharmaceuticals, electronics, chemical products, etc. All these are they are going to face an imminent raw material shortage and the component shortage, at least for a short-term period. And thirdly, shutdown incurs loss of revenues and closure of MSMEs. For example, if lockdown persists, 40% of the MSMEs will be shut down due to losses and low cash flows. So as we all know that MSMEs will be having low cash flows, and this will greatly affect in payment of wages to the workers. So consumers who are locked out at home, they cannot spend on goods and services and other essentials, and corporates will not think of investing because there will be subdued demand will be there. So hence manufacturing output investment will be under great pressure, great pressure for the next, at least for the next 2 quarters. So the Automobile Component Manufacturer Association, it said that long time back, uh, that is 15 days back time, the automotive component manufacturer said that the production loss for the automotive components industry is 1,000 to 2,000 crores per day. And the other end, dairy sales got impacted. uh, Amul, the largest player, it has witnessed a 25% dip in sales. And the other hand, the KMF is the second largest milk cooperative in the country, and it has seen a slump of about decline of about 30% of its um, decline. 30%, and that is 30% decline is due to the decline in bulk consumption by hotels, restaurants, cafes, and across the states. On the other hand, the MSMEs, who form a major chunk of manufacturing sector in India, and they play an important role in providing large scale employment, and they also share uh, a large component in the country's exports. So all this will get affected. And recent report by the MSME, recent annual report on MSME indicate that the sector contribute about 30% of India's GDP, and based on conservative estimates, it employs around 60% of industrial workers. So overall, we can say that 97% of MSMEs are classified as micro firms with an investment of less than 25 lakh. Many of the micro enterprises are small, and they are run by household businesses. The MSMEs are present in all sectors. That is, it's in the manufacturing sector. MSMEs are in trade. MSMEs are also in the services sector. So the growth of credit was either low or negative for the MSME sector. So as we have shown in the state of the banking sector, so the credit declined drastically, especially to the industrial sector. So industry, it's all the MSME also all the component of the manufacturing sector. The growth of the credit is either low or negative for the MSMEs. The recent problems with the NBFCs sector has further affected the credit allocation to this sector. So, and this is the before sectoral deployment. So before we go into the sectoral deployment, we'll discuss at the aggregate level of the services sector. So the service sectors have been affected directly due to the fall in uses of services due to the lockdown, including aviation, hotels, restaurants, tourism, the retail sector, construction sector. So all these have been affected in large scale. International Air Transport Association in general recently pointed out that the COVID crisis will result in 9% loss in jobs volume, passenger volume, 2.1 billion loss in passenger-based revenues, leading to 30 lakh job losses and 3.2 billion loss to Indian GDP. The other, and the Center for Asia Pacific Aviation sometime back, it said that it has assessed the impact of the lockdown on the aviation industry, and it said that India is going to lose 4 billion this year. And this was the impact. On the other end, the National Restaurant Association, sometime back, it was reported in Hindu newspaper. It said that jobs over 7 million people get affected across those who are working in restaurants across the country are at stake. This was at a bird's eye view of the impact on the impact of the this COVID crisis on the industry, agriculture industry, and the services sector. So now we look into the impact on the different selected sectors of the industry. Okay, we are focusing on the impact of this COVID-19 on industrial sector. That too, we have selected a few industries. Suppose if you look into the apparel and textile industries, it contributes 2% of the GDP, 45%, 45 million employment as per 2018 and 19. So the major impact of the uh, of the current crisis on apparel and textile industries is that it will lead to temporary closure of factories and layoffs, and probably there will be fall in global demand as well, because India exports large amount of apparel and textiles to Western countries, and there will be due to fall in global demand. So the exports of apparel and textiles will definitely get affected, and there will be in turn there will be employment will also get affected, and the production decline in production is expected to be around 10 to 12%. And the another important major industry which contributes overall 9 to 10% of the GDP is automobiles and auto components sector. Automobile industry contributes 7.1% to GDP, and the auto components contributes 2.3% of 2.3% of the GDP. So, and it provides employment to the tune of 40 million employment, both casual and formal and informal employment. And the major impact on this industry is disruption in supply of raw materials, and there will be weak demand, both in terms of domestic as well as the global. Global, there will be weak demand, and the demand will contract. And in addition to this, there will be due to global slowdown, the exports of auto and auto components industry will definitely get affected, and there will be delay in the new launches of any new launches of any products in the auto industry. And the another major sector is the aviation and the tourism industry, and this aviation sector contributes 2.4% of the GDP, and the tourism contributes to the GDP to the tune of 9.2%, and overall it provides aviation and the tourism sector provides employment to the tune of 42.7 million jobs. According to the Indian Association of Tour Operators, it estimates that hotel and travel sector together will incur loss of 85 billion Indian national rupees due to travel restrictions. That is because of that is in the aviation sector. Also, tourism and allied sector such as hotels and restaurants will also get affected. The other important sector from the services sector is the building and construction sector, and it contributes 8.2% to the GDP and provides employment to the tune of 49.5 million people are employed in this sector. And this building sector has a multiplier effect around 250 industries, including cement, steel, electrical equipments, and other building materials. So this industry is also going to be largely affected, and the demand will definitely get postponed. And the consumer and retail sector contributes 10% to the GDP and provides employment. In the overall employment, the consumer and retail sector contributes 8% of the total employment. And most importantly, this sector will also get impacted, especially the non-essential demands will get affected. And moreover, the cash flow constraints will be there, and the supply chain will definitely get affected if lockdown persists. So now what they are managing is through the inventories. So if the lockdown persists, so definitely the supply chain will get affected. And due to now the relaxations, it may improve also. Okay, the financial services, especially the banking industry. So banking industry, it has a deposits of 132.1 trillion rupees of deposits. The overall deposits in the banking sector. So what is the impact of the COVID crisis on the banking sector is that there is the fall in the transactions banking income. So due to low cross-border trade, there is reduced loans due to recessionary market conditions. Especially the market demand is low, that is the expectations are low there because of there is low demand, low recession market conditions. The banking sector uh, may may not take a risk, the risk of default and the issues of credit quality, and as well as the general stressed assets are the major impact impact on this industry. And the food and agricultural sector. This sector contributes a 16.5% of gross value added and provides employment to the tune of 43%. So, what would be the impact of this COVID-19 on the agricultural sector is that we know that due to lockdown, there will be, though it is agriculture sector is exempted as per the home ministry orders, the interstate food movements are erratic, and especially the import dependent agrochemical industries, fertilizer sectors, they may see volatility in the long-term supply. And since there is a Rabi season, harvest for wheat, rice, and pulses, it also may get affected due to restrictions, unavailability of interstate movement of labor, and also food processing sectors will definitely will get affected. Seasonal industries such as mango, seafood, etc. They will be affected in large scale because they need labor, and we know that there is large migration of a large migration of labor to their hometowns, and the export of food categories like meat, tea, spices, seafood will get affected. So because there will be the demand contract, and all this will the impact of COVID on food and agriculture industry. And another important sector which has a lion's share in the GDP is the MSMEs. MSMEs contribute around 30 to 35% of GDP, and provides employment to the tune of 114 million people. It provides employment to the tune of 114 million people, and micro constitutes 99% of industries in MSME. Small constitutes 0.52%, and medium constitutes only 0.01%. That means in large scale we have only micro industries which providing a large scale employment and is as a lion's share in the GDP. So what is the impact of this COVID-19 on the MSME sector is that majorly the domestic supplies and the imports both is going to suffer, and they will have a great impact on the cost of production, and there will be impact on supply chain, and cyclically there will be impact on future investments and expansion. Contractual wage labor will get affected, and the loss of livelihood and the low purchasing power because it's all MSME is working on contractual wage labors, and there will be decline in liquidity which affects consumer demand, industries, retail services, and moreover, uh, due to external global low demand, so there the exports will also get affected. So this was the major impact on the on the MSMEs due to this lockdown and COVID crisis. Suppose if we look into the employment status, so this was the data released by Center for Monitoring Indian Economy, where it says where it says that urban employment as unemployment as uh, increased manifold. If you look the CMI data, 15th March 2020, the unemployment was around, especially this is the urban unemployment, and it was around 8.21%. And by 22nd March 2020, urban employment has marginally increased to 8.66. During the period of lockdown, 29 March 2020, unemployment has increased to 30.01%. 5th April, unemployment is around 31%. So based on a rough calculation, it is observed that 50 million people have lost jobs in just 2 weeks of the lockdown. So this was said by Pranab Sen, and he is the former chief statistician of India. So this was the scale of unemployment situation in India. So what we can say that the overall unemployment rate increased from 8.4% to 23.8%. So their data for the weekly ending April 5 estimates the rate at 30.09, 30.93%. That means around 31% is for urban areas, and rural unemployment is around 23%, 20%, which is not shown here, and the overall unemployment in the India is around 23.4%. So which was not depicted here. So I have shown only for the urban areas. So the rural, this for the same period, rural unemployment is around 20%, and rural urban put together at the overall all India level, the unemployment rate is around 23.4%. Okay, and not only does this unemployment affect workers directly employed in in the sectors, but also the many indirectly employed, such as vendors, also get affected because of this lockdown and that. And the major problem, the perils of this is that the finding workers finding themselves suddenly out of work, and they are unable to pay rent, and they are unable to feed themselves, where we have seen that thousands of migrant workers and daily wage earners making a desperate attempt to go back to their homes, to go back to their cities, and it poses a serious threat both to them as well as for the industries. Since we have some may have just been sent home for now, the actual scope of unemployment we even may be bigger when we start getting more information, more data on the employment perspective. So this was the impact on the unemployment, where we can see, as per the pronops, and we can say that 50 million people are 50 million people have lost jobs in just 2 weeks. And after this, if we want to look into the policy measures taken by the government, policy measures taken by the government, both the fiscal policy measures as well as the monetary policy measures taken by the government to provide a stimulus, or to provide measures, recovery measures. Uh, Firstly, if we are focusing on the fiscal policy measures, so 36 hours into the lockdown, the finance minister Nirmala Sitharaman has announced a financial package which is claimed to be around 1.7 lakh crore, which constitutes around 5% of the total spending and around 1% of the GDP. And the main objective of this fiscal stimulus is guaranteeing access to food and cash for the poor and vulnerable sections. But if we look very closer examination of the stimulus packages, it raises doubt about the quantum of relief package. One important component of the package is the free provision of equal amount of eligible quantity of cereals and pulses, that is for 3 months of distribution through PDS, and it is going to it is expected to benefit 2/3 of the population in these hard times. So that is what that free 5 kg of wheat or rice per person per month, and above over and above the present entitlement under PDF, which is 5 kg. So additionally, that means they will be receiving for 10 kg of wheat or wheat or rice per person per month, and free 1 kg of pulse per meal, and it is going to benefit 80 crore households. So this is again done through PDS system and public distribution system. The another direct cash payment is that advance payment of the PM Kishan, that is transfer by about 4 months. Uh, Advance transfer by 4 months is another element of the package where the government is going to transfer 2,000 rupees for under to the farmers under PM Kisan scheme. Although it is going to benefit 8 crore households, this does not involve any additional expenditure. Um because it in fact involves an expenditure of 17,500 crore out of the budgeted 75,000 crore in union budget 2021, because it's already presented in the budget 2021, but this is an advance payment which was in the this advance payment is to the tune of 17,500 crore, but the budgeted is 75,000 crore in the budget 2021. Similarly, the revision of wages for all states under MGNRGA. Again, it cannot be counted as a relief package because the wage rise was announced much earlier, and it was notified by the Ministry of Rural Development on March 23rd as part of annual revision. That means according to the package, the wage has been hiked to rupees 202 from 182 rupees with effect from April 1. So each worker is going to get rupees 2,000 additional, and it is going to benefit 13.6 crore families. And if we examine closer, in fact, the wage figure of 2002 per day, which has been hiked from 182 rupees, is only an average national figure, and it convey very little. But several states have been paying more than this, more than 202 rupees. So another fiscal measure taken by the government is ex gratia payments to women account holders. Women account holders of under Pradhan Mantri Jan Dhan Yojana for poor widows, senior citizens, and physically challenged persons. And it is going to provide much relief for the beneficiaries. That is going to benefit for a 3 crore households. Another interesting package is that about 40% of the 40% of the announcement. Uh, in order before going to that, the uh, the organizations with up to 100 employees, 100 employees, out of which 90% having wages less than 15,000 per month. So the central government is going to contribute the contributory share of 12% each by employee, and the employer is going to be deposited by the government from April and June. Again, this is going to benefit 80 lakh employees. Women in the organized sector, so non-refundable withdrawal up to 75% or 3-month wages, which is lower, and it is going to benefit 4.8 crore workers. The which we have missed is women covered under Ujjwala scheme. For them, the free gas cylinders from April and June, which is going to benefit 20.40 crore families. So these are the these were the measures, fiscal stimulus measures, which have been taken by the government, which has been announced by the finance minister. So an interesting so, okay. So this shows that how it will be the schemes, how it has been financed. Okay, so Pradhan Mantri Jan Dhan Yojana, where the women cash transfers to women, so it comes from the Ministry of Finance, Department of Financial Services. So the allocated budget for that in 2019 is 0.01 crore, and this is sourced from a paper written by Chakrabarti L and E. Thomas, Maleka Chakrabarti and Thomas. It was published in EPW. This is from that paper. So the budget allocated is 0.01 crore, and the revised allocation is 0 crore. And the in the 2020 budget, the allocated for Pradhan Mantri Jan Dhan Yojana is 0.01 crore. Now the relief package is 30,600 crore. So Pradhan Mantri Ujjwala Yojana, which comes under petroleum natural gas, in 2019 the allocated budget is 2,724 crore. The revised budget estimate is 3,724 crore. But if we look the 2020 budget, it has been there was a drastic cut. So now the relief package, they have increased the allocation to 13,000 crore. So suppose if we look, there is no comments for that. So cash transfers to senior citizens, there was no budget allocation, but the relief package is a minuscule 3,000 crore. Food subsidy, that is PDS, that is through Consumer Affairs and Food and Public Distribution. So the budget allocation is 1,84,000 crore, but the revised estimates is 1,08,000 crore. In 2020, the allocated expenditure is 1,15,560 crore. So now the relief package, so that is, we are not, it is not counted in the relief package because it is already comes under in the 2020 budget estimates. So the major thing is the cost of 3 months of take of cereals and pulses distribution cost. Then the another one is PM Kisan, Kisan, and that is from the Agriculture and Farmer Welfare Department. The budget allocation is 75,000 crore. So the revised estimates is 54,370 crore. That is underspending. In the 2020 budget, the budget estimates is 75,000 crore. Now the relief package is out of 75,000 crore. Now the government was only front loading, that is, it is giving advance payment to the farmers, which was already announced in the 2020 budget. Narega, rural development, it comes from the Rural Development Ministry. So budget estimate is 60,000 crore. The revised estimates is 71,000 crore. For the 2020 budget, the budget allocation is 65,000 crore, and the relief package, that whatever the revised wages which has been increased from 182 rupees to 2,202 rupees, so that does not require any additional expenditure because that comes under in the 2020 budget estimate itself. Self-help groups, that is, the banks are expected to load more. So that is what self-help groups, which was here. Self limit for collateral free loans raised to 20 lakh. So that means the free loan raised to 20 lakh from 10 lakh. So for this, the 63 lakh self-help groups are going to benefit, out of which that is 6.85 crore households. This is just only the bank will take this load. That is self-help groups. The banks are expected to take load. That means that they will from 10 lakh to 20 lakh crore. So EPF regulation, so that is for the employee share, the EPF regulation will get amended to allow higher non-refundable withdrawal. That again does not involves any expenditure. And the organized sector PF payment of 24% of the salary, the government will pay 24% of salary to EPF for next 3 months for those with salary which is less than 15,000 rupees, and for the establishments which are less than 100 employees. So, and this involves expenditure. And health insurance, the insurance for 50 lakh government health workers. So that again comes the expenditure will be there. That expenditure will be in terms of paying premium. And moreover, now the funds for construction workers, Building and Constructions Welfare Act. So the budget allocation 31,000 crore, the relief package is 31,000 crore. District Mineral Fund, National Mineral Policy 35,925 crore. So that means these two, 31,000 crore and 35,000, 925 crore. So this is an interesting fact about the package, is that about 40% of the announced amount is from these two fund. Amount is from the account of Building and Construction Workers Welfare Fund and the District Mineral Fund. That means out of 1,70,000 crore which has been announced by the government, so 40% of the announced amount is from these two accounts: Building and Construction Workers Welfare Account and District Mineral Fund. And the rising of a limit to collateral free lending to self-help groups is expected to benefit, as I already told, 7 crore households. However, this does not going to have any additional burden on the union government. The again, which I am going to repeat here, is that the government is going to pay the employers and employees share of employee EPF fund, which I already mentioned here, 15,000, less than 15,000, salary of less than 15,000, and the employees less than 100 employees, which is a positive step. But what we can observe is that it is not a huge commitment, and it will not going to benefit them immediately, although it grants the workers a relief for the time being, and hope it is going to benefit in the medium term. The states and the union territories which are fighting on the front line have been demanding the relief from the union. The finance minister, which has announced the insurance scheme for the health workers fighting COVID-19, hospitals, which I already mentioned here, which requires premium payment. So that's one positive of this. In addition to this, there is a transfer of 17,287 crore by the union government to the states on 3rd April, and which is a temporary relief for some states, although it falls short of the demand. And so the monetary policy response. So this was the fiscal policy measure. So the fiscal policy is going to have a bigger role compared to the monetary policy, and because it directly goes to the people. The package, though we say that the package is inadequate as compared to the problem, also it amounts to a tweaking of some benefits which already exist. So these are the fiscal policy stimulus measures. Now, suppose if we look into the monetary policy measures taken by the government to contain the crisis, is in understanding the gravity of the problem, the gravity of the crisis, the RBI advanced its monetary policy meeting by a week, and the announced monetary policy has paid attention to ensure adequate liquidity into the system by reducing the cost of loans and encouraging the transmission and the regulatory easing. So we can see that on the one side I've shown in the policy rate, liquidity, widening of monetary policy corridor, policy response, regulatory easing, and review the limits of monetization. So what is the policy change and all that we are going to discuss now. As a policy rate, the reduction of cash reserve ratio, the average cash reserve ratio is nothing but the average daily balance that banks are required to maintain with the RBI by 100 basis points to 3%. The liquidity here, the cash reserve ratio was cut by 100 basis points to 3%, and this is going to infuse a liquidity to the tune of 3.74 lakh crore to the banking system. And in the policy rate, repo rate has been reduced to 4.4% from 5.15%. That is, it has been reduced by 0.75 basis points, and the reverse repo rate is reduced to 4% from 4.90%, and it is reduced by 0.9%. So with inflation, with the targeted inflation of 4%, so India is having now a zero interest rate. Again, the targeted long-term repo operations that allows banks to keep funds at a repo rate for a longer period of time at the current rate of 3-year tenure will add another 1 lakh crore of liquidity. So, however, there is a condition: the money that is uh, borrowed, it has to be borrowed must be deployed in investment grade corporate bonds or commercial papers and non-convertible debentures over and above the outstanding level of the investments in these bonds. So that means the whatever that is borrowed through the long-term repo operations, that the banks can fund, they can borrow funds from the repo rate that is for a longer period of time, so that they have to invest in the investment grade corporate bonds and commercial papers, and that is a, a, which infuse more liquidity into the system. So on the other hand, the accommodation under marginal standing facility allows scheduled banks that with a marginal standing facility increase to 3% of the statutory liquidity ratio. So this allows scheduled banks to borrow additional amounts over and above the liquidity adjustment facility at an interest rate which has been raised by 3% of the SLR. This can infuse liquidity to the tune of 1.37 lakhs crore. So overall, put together all these three liquidity measures, CRR and targeted long-term repo rate and marginal standing facility. So put together, it is going to infuse 3.74 lakh crore liquidity into the banking system. So the LF involves widening of the other thing is that although margin standing facility is not used by banks on a regular basis, these three steps, which have ABC, is going to infuse liquidity of 3.74 lakh crore. And the other thing is widening of monetary policy corridor. The corridor raised to 0.65 to 0.5%. So this make it less attractive for banks to keep money in the RBI, so that this it discourages banks to keep money in the RBI and it encourages to lend more money. The RBI has also used a trick to encourage transmission of these rate cuts by widening the monetary policy rate corridor. So another is regulatory easing, the moratorium on term loans and working capital loans for 3 months. So this eases the balance sheet of banks while regulatory forbearance provides relief to borrowers. So the another policy response through monetary policy is the review the limits of monetization. So now the RBI has reviewed the limits of ways and means advance limits to state governments and union territories by 30%. So pending its final recommendations, the RBI through an announcement in 1st April has raised the withdrawal limits, ways and means advance limits for states and union territories by 30%. This helps them to come over from the situation and situation of this crisis. They will be having more funds to finance this crisis. So the union government, that means this increases the fiscal space for subnational government, that means the state governments, to finance their deficits. So the union government will borrow 3 lakh crore and the state government together is going to borrow around 1.27 lakh crore because of this monetization, that's a fiscal space. Uh, so this was the abstract overview of the monetary policy response taken by the RBI. And if we compare uh, the fiscal stimulus package to rest of the countries, and this is again taken from a paper by Mahendra Dev S and Sen Gupta, Rajeshwari Sen Gupta, and um, the fiscal stimulus package compares in percent of GDP. So suppose India is it's just the spending around nearly 1% of GDP to overcome this crisis. Whereas other countries such as US, China, Spain, Germany, France, UK, South Korea, they are especially US, Spain, Germany, France, UK, Malaysia, they are spending 16 in double digits. And some of the countries are spending in single digits to 1.30, 1.3%. China, South Korea 5%, Brazil 2% of their GDP on this as a fiscal stimulus. Uh, for India, the package includes only relief measures for the informal workers and others. It is possible government may announce package for industries, including MSMEs, which was recently yesterday announced by Honorable Finance Minister. So, and today by the Prime Minister was announced yesterday, and today by in detail by the Finance Minister, package for the MSMEs. So. So overall now, India is that was the quantum of fiscal measures taken by the government. Now, what measures we can expect from the government? So, although we are in the third phase of lockdown, there is no clarity on the time it is going to take. It is going to take out. It will take to come out of this crisis. We don't know when we are going to contain this infection and when we are going to come out of this crisis. How much time it is going to take? All that we do not have a clear answer. The extent of the damage it has inflicted and the cost of relief and the rehabilitation required and all that, it requires more time to assess it. For example, uh, uh, All India Motor Transport Association, some time back, it was reported in the business line that they have requested government for deferment of uh, EMI for 6 months, extension of validity of the fitness of the vehicles, exemption from road tax, goods tax, and all that. So that was the concern of the transport sector, and each sector have its own specific sector-specific concern. So because of the crisis, these were the problems faced by the this industry. So what in overview of this, what we can suggest is that, or what we can necessary measures the government and government can take is that the government should emphasize on small business, and that is again to higher allocation higher, higher allocation of resources. So now, because the MSME sector, small business account for 90% of the manufacturing enterprises, 45% of the industrial output, and 40% of exports, and the large employment it comes from the MSME. So for that reason, we have to focus on the small business. We have to revive the production. Uh, so now the issue at hand is to revive the production in all the sectors, especially sectors where inventories are very low. Suppose if we take the automobile industry or the automotive components industry, they have a lot of inventories, but industries which are having low inventories, but they are having higher potential of employment. So such industries, for example, textiles, garments, leather industries, processing industries, pharma industries, medical accessory industries. So these industries are the drivers of the economy. So drivers of the economy. So the government should focus on reviving the production in these industries, and the we have to enhance the stimulus to these industries. Suppose if we compare the stimulus package of US and UK, France and Germany, so they are overwhelmingly focused on the small business. They are overwhelmingly emphasized on the small business. So now the government has at least give MSMEs easy credit to come out from the crisis, or it has to help to pay salaries and wages, easy credit, and the EMI loan moratorium for non-formal informal workers. The other thing is universal PDS. Apart from this, for the small business, emphasis on small business, the government can think over of providing universal PDS, public distribution system, because according to official estimates, the government has 58 point around 59 million tons of metric tons of food grains in Food Corporation of India, out of which out of 59 metric million tons, 31 million metric ton is of rice, and 27 metric million ton is wheat. But however, the food grain required is just 21 metric tons. So whatever the surplus is, the government can use, and it can go for a universal PDS system, which is going to benefit to not only the BPL families but also APL families during the times of crisis. And the moreover, the another important measures the government can take is that higher resource allocation to the states, because the states are closest to, the states will be closer to the people. So only the states can manage, and the health is a state subject according to the constitution. So the government can give more resources to the state, or the relaxing FRBM Act that enhance FRBM Act, the relaxing from 3% to enhancing from 3% to 4% of the GDP they can borrow. So if the government is relaxed in terms of financing for the health crisis, or if the government gives the more resources to the financial resources to the states, so that is more beneficial. That was the necessary measure required to contain this crisis. So this was my views on this was the this was these are all my views on the COVID crisis and the impact on the Indian economy. So economy in the sense focusing on all different aspects, mainly the fiscal stimulus and the monetary stimulus, and what is going to impact, what is would be the impact on the Indian economy, which is very difficult to forecast also. I hope I have justified my justified justified for my for your time, and thank you, Professor Ramesh.